Hello, today I'd like to talk about Oracle Business Rules. This is an overview presentation, very, very high level. My name is Heidi Buelow, and I'm a product manager in the BPM team. The Oracle Business Rules is part of BPM, and it's also part of SoSuite as well. So this is an introductory overview, it's very high level. First talk about business rules and what do we mean by business rules in a very generic sense. So this is not Oracle specific. This is to give us some sense of vocabulary and how do we talk about business rules in the same context. So what is a business rule? Business rules are decisions, basically decisions that are part of the business, so hence business rules. It's around the business policy, so it may be spending policies, maybe approval matrices. You may want to set some constraints that are business-specific constraints. Maybe there's regulatory requirements. Maybe there's computation, scoring, and reasoning capabilities. You might make offers based on the customer's status. So business rules are not considered to be procedural logic or programming logic in your code. They are very much outside of the code and owned by the business. So a regulatory requirement may change, but the logic of the code doesn't change. The regulatory requirement may say, 10% of the time we have to do this, or now it's 15% of the time we have to do this, but the thing that we're doing is the same and the logic in the code doesn't change at all. It's a business decision. When we automate business rules, we want to make sure that we have this kinds of functionality, this kinds of technical functionality in the automation. We want to make sure that we've extracted the business rules from the procedural logic. So the processes will remain the same, but the business rule will be outside of the process itself. We want to make sure that we can express the rule declaratively. So I want to be able to say in a statement form, what is the rule? So that is very legible and readable by any reader, not just a programmer. I want to be able to execute the business rules with an inference-capable engine, so that the one writing the rules doesn't have to know everything about the whole set of rules, but the rules can be inferred one from another. We also want to make sure that a business user can edit the business rules. So these rules are owned by the business. The business user is the one who decides when a rule has to change, when a business is changing. So maybe I want to have coupons or discounts at different times of the year. That's a business decision. Your programmer is not making that decision. The decision is up to the business user. So the business user should have access to the rules, should be able to read the rules, and should be able to change the rules. So what do we mean by declarative? So we declare the rule instead of writing code. So for example, these are two rules. If a customer is a premium customer, offer them 10% discount. If the customer is a gold customer, then offer them a 5% discount. These are very specific, statements. They're sort of independent. You could ask, run them both. One of them would be true and one of them would not be true. The control flow and the order that these rules are run in an inference engine are determined by the rules engine itself. So the statements themselves do not determine anything about the control flow. There's no ordering and there's no dependency across the two of them. This is much easier to maintain. So a business user can look at a statement and read the statement, not need to know anything about any of the other statements, and be able to create rules that are powerful and subject to the business. So this this sort of style relates very well to a business user. So here we have inference. So we're talking about declarative now. Now we have inference. So in here we have a third statement. The third statement says, well, if the customer spends more than 1,000, then that customer should have a premium status. So now I can run all three rules and infer that this customer gets 10% discount. Even if the customer was originally gold, then the customer is going to be premium. And then I go back and look at the first rule, then the customer gets a 10% discount. So this is inferring that to change the outcome of the rule based on these statements. So they're modular, they're independent. It doesn't matter what order you run them in. The engine, the rule engine, the inference engine, is going to make the determination about that third inference rule. So when we talk about rules technology, most important things, and I've talked about both of these already briefly, agility and transparency. So agility is making the rules easy to change. So we want the rules to be able to be changed as the business changes. We want to be able to change them quickly, easily. We don't want to have long development cycles where we go through a release cycle, and we want to make sure that we can tune the rules according to the business changes. So if a discount, we want to change the date. Instead of starting on December 1, we want to start it on November 15th. All we have to do is change the date, right? We shouldn't have to go through a long development cycle in order to make a change to what I have deployed on my application. I should be able to just tune the rule and have that be agile to the business decision that we're making, okay? So we want them to be responsive to the business changes, and we want them to be easy to change. Transparency is another very important part of business rules. So we want them to be readable, accessible, consistently applied. We want to make sure that a user, a business user, can read the rule and understand the rule, and anybody can read the rule. So a lot of times when you're talking about code or Java code or any other kind of code, sometimes it's difficult to read it, and maybe if you think that you can read it, there's a lot of things going on that maybe you don't understand. And even a programmer has trouble reading another programmer's code, right? Because there's all these different ways of styles. So with a rule technology that's for a business user, focused on the business user, we make the rules accessible to any reader. And consistently applied is very important. So we want to make sure that if I have a rule, a regulatory rule is really a good example of this. I don't want to have a rule in one place that says one thing and a rule in another place that says another thing. I want to make sure that I have the same rule in both places and it can be consistently applied and my regulatory requirements are being met. Okay, so that was the business user's benefit for the rule technology. Now I have an IT benefit. So an IT users also benefit from rule technology. So for example, even if I didn't have a business user, the IT department would also benefit. So we have because of this agility and this transparency, it makes it easier to read and easier to use and change quickly. The IT department is also going to benefit. So Gartner has a study out where the IT department budget, was improved at least 5 to 40%. So legacy preservation is another important part of an IT department. You have all these systems that are in place. If you can extract, and you can still use the systems, but if you can extract the rules, the business rules out, or the rules, even if they're not business rules, if you can extract the rules out and then they become agile and transparent, then it reduces the complexity that you're maintaining in these older systems, and you can bring the rules outside of that. It's the rules that tend to change most often. Compliance is also another very important part. So compliance, even at an IT level, is very important. So you certify the rules for compliance consistency, very important part. So everybody benefits. So how do we decide where do we apply this technology, the rules technology? Volatility is actually probably the most important one. If the rules are going to be changing frequently, then you want to have that extracted from the rest of the application that you're building so that you only need to change that one part, the business rule. So when you have rules that are changing frequently, then you don't want to have to be turning your application over and over and over and redeploying and going through all that. Just bring the rule outside of the procedural logic. Change the rule there. Ownership is another important part. Who owns the rules? So these particular rules that are owned by the business, you want them extracted from the procedural logic so that the business users can see the rules for what they are and be able to understand them and change them as necessary according to the business changes. And then of course compliance is a very important one. So you need to be compliant. So you want to make that as easy and as quick as possible. When regulatory compliance changes, then you have to be able to make sure that you can meet those changes as quickly as possible. So some of the use cases, that fall into these categories are here. So risk determination. So if you're doing a loan or a credit check, insurance, you want to look, the business wants to look at the risk. What is the risk for that particular transaction with that particular customer? And there's particular rules that are very easy to outline, and you can write your business rules around that to determine what is the risk of giving this loan, of offering this insurance, and then make a determination about what to do for the next step. So automation of decision steps. So this is very common part of how we use business rules. So approval rules. If I have a set of tasks to do, a bunch of different users are doing different tasks, and then depending on the data of that task, I may want to go to an additional level of management, or multiple people, or maybe another department, determined by the data in the task itself. So for example, if I'm doing a loan application and the loan application is for a particular size, then maybe I would want to go through some set of approval rules to determine who actually gets to approve this request. Sometimes you can automate it. Sometimes it's very low risk, not a high amount of money. Those kinds of things can be automated. And then other times you want to go through multiple layers of approval. And that's a very common example. But you can imagine other kinds of approval rules where you would want to determine that using a business rule. Product configuration is an interesting one because you don't maybe not think of that as a decision to make. But product configuration is actually pretty common. So you're looking at all the data that you have for how you're going to configure your product, and based on that, you come out with a configuration rule. Benefits, pensions, unemployment, these benefits that are determined by your history, by your data, personal data, your, how long you've been with a company, whatever, these are all the data input that go into determining your benefits. So assignments are like leads or opportunities, and who do I assign it to? So I have different people in my organization. I'm going to assign this sort of lead to that person who has the skills that can meet that type of lead, right, or that type of opportunity. And so I'll do scoring and skill sets and all kinds of decisions around who gets assigned to that task. Order decomposition is also a pretty fun one when you have an order that has lots and lots of line items, and you want to decide if it's how big is it, what kinds of what kind of product am I buying, and I want to take the order apart and look at all individually, and I can go for each line in the line item and make a determination about what to do with that order. Customer privacy is also very important part of business rules. It's you want to make sure that you are making the right decisions for that particular customer, but also keeping it very private. And of course, Sarbanes-Oxley is part of our lives these days, and it's a compliance and regulatory, and we all have to make sure that we're following those rules. Okay, so that was a generic discussion about rules, anybody's rules, but now let's talk briefly about Oracle business rules. And this is a very high level overview, but this is specific to our product. So when I talk about Oracle business rules, what is their product? It's the red dotted box here are all of the components that we call OBR, Oracle Business Rules. So inside the red box, if we start at the bottom, we have the engine, and this runs on the server and it executes the rules. And you give it some input and you get some output. So the engine is called a ready engine. So a ready engine is an algorithm that is an inference algorithm. It's industry, open. Anybody can get one. It was originally created at Stanford University. But basically you take XML facts or Java facts. These are the data inputs, and run the engine, run the rules, and you get some output. So if we look just above that, what is a rule? What is a rule? So a rule is really a rule dictionary. A rule dictionary is a set of rule sets. So you can have multiple, you have a dictionary. Dictionary contains rule sets. and rule sets contain rules. So those are the rules that fire. We saw that on the earliest slides, where the different statements. Those are the actual rules themselves, and they're contained in a rule set contained in a dictionary. So it's just a file that contains all of this information. Okay, so let's drop down to the bottom again. On the left-hand side, it's a decision service interface, and this is a web service interface. And any software can call a web service, but this is how we use it in our product, in the middleware tooling product. So BPMN processes and Beeple processes call the rule engine using the decision service interface. It's a web service interface. Okay. On the right-hand side, it's a rules API for talking to the engine, and there it's a Java interface. It's a standard JSR 94, and you would write some Java code, plain old Java code, and call the interface through that API. And you write your own code and do whatever you want. You can call the API directly. It's a very mature and functionally rich API in both cases. Using the web service interface, takes care of, it's more of a wrapper, takes care of things like caching and connection pooling and things like that. And on the right-hand side, it's directly into, you have the full power of the full API yourself. All right, and then the rules SDK is what you would use to author rules. So if you wanted to write your own authoring tool for creating, having a design time, however you want it to look, then you would use the rules SDK to create the rule dictionary and author the rules themselves. We actually have two styles of authoring that are out of the box, or inside the box, the dotted red box, but we provide them out of the box to the end users. One we call a rules designer, and this is a part of JDeveloper, the IDE. So it's a desktop, application that you can author rules, use to author rules. Rule Composer is a browser-based authoring tool, and you can also author rules using the browser-based Composer, and they're both nearly equal in functionality, so they're both about the same. The Rules Composer may be a little bit more business-friendly. It's a little bit more approachable from a user's perspective, a business user's perspective. Rules Designer, because it's part of JDeveloper, there's all these other aspects to JDeveloper that may be a little bit inhibiting. All right, so you can choose whichever one you want. And then custom authoring, so on the top left-hand side, custom authoring is if you wanted to create your own authoring tools, you could do that. And we have some interfaces where you can, for example, interface with Excel or other Word applications, or you could write your own. On the right-hand side, we actually use rules behind the scenes in some of the tooling that we provide as part of our suite. So for example, in the end user uses Workspace to process tasks, and the end user may choose to set a vacation rule. So when that person's on vacation, the tasks are assigned to somebody else. That's in the background is using the business rules engine, and it's just built in, and it's sort of like you can imagine that's a custom user interface for using rules in a very, very specific way. So if you wanted to use rules in a very specific way, like a vacation rule, you could write your own front end and do it that way, just the way we're using it in our own product. All right, so here's a very kind of technical look at it, another technical look at OBR. So Oracle Business Rules runs as an engine on top of the runtime, the unified runtime, which is, you would consider that the SOA infrastructure. So the SOA infrastructure basically has engines that can plug into it, and the business rules is one of those engines. And BPMN engine, there's a Beeple engine, there's a human workflow engine, there's lots of engines. Some of them are listed here, and that whole thing runs on, can use a service bus as a connectivity interface. But basically, it's just an engine, just like any of the other engines. All right. The MDS is the place where the dictionaries live. So when you deploy your composite application, your SOA composite application that has a business rule in it, the rule and the application, the composite applications reside in MDS. And then the different tooling that we have accesses MDS directly. So we have the rules designer and we have the rules composer, and with we're using MDS in multiple ways. So you can deploy, which I mentioned, you can deploy to MDS, and then the composer can actually see the rule that's been deployed and can tweak the rule that's actually live. You can also publish. So if you publish, you're talking about you want design time. You don't want it to be running yet. You're just talking about design time, and so the business user, perhaps using composer, and the IT user, perhaps using designer, can actually edit the exact same rule. You're not passing a file back and forth or communicating in some way, this is what I meant. They're actually, can take turns and edit this exact same rule and have it be very tightly coupled development between the two groups, okay? So the composer actually has quite a bit of functionality. This is a BPM composer where you can edit the rules and publish them, and you can also deploy them. And then the SOA composer allows you to edit them after they've been deployed. You can edit them at runtime and edit them directly. And finally, on the lower right is part of the testing tooling that we have, the Enterprise Manager Fusion Middleware Control, which will show you when you've executed a rule, the exact steps that fired, so the exact rules that were true when they were reviewed, and these rules fired, and then these evaluated to true, these rules fired, and then this was my result. And what you can do is at any point in that audit trails, you can select, say, well, on your third step, what were you looking at? What was the data that was available in memory? And you just select that step, and then you can see the data that was available in memory at that time for the decision to be made in the way that it made that decision. So it was very nice for reviewing decisions that were made, and of course also for debugging. So that's kind of a technical overview. And then here's another look at it. This is a view of a composite XML. This is the JDeveloper or the BPM, the designer view. This is not the composer view, not the browser view. So it's kind of IT-ish. But the idea is that you can have these yellow boxes are the business rules. So, and these are 3 different styles of how you might want a composite that contains a business rule. So the first one just has the rule. It has a web service front end. There's nothing else going on. And so that's very nice where you want to have that rule making decisions. You give it input, it gives you output, and you're using that somewhere else, in some other place, and you just make a web service call to call it. And the second one, we have the 2 cases actually. One is from a process, so the blue box is a BPMN process or a BPO process, which is calling the rule. And so I'm going to do this, call the rule. After I've called the rule, then maybe I'll take some branching logic based on the output of that rule. Okay? Very, very, very common use case. The green box is a human task. So my BPO process or my BPMN process has a human task in it, so as one of the steps. And we have a sort of specialized way of using business rules with human tasks, and there's a lot of artifacts that are created around that, make it easy, so that when you, instead of knowing ahead of time, so for example, when you have a human task, you can have that task routed to multiple people or whatever, very, very nice set of options there. But when you don't always know at design time what you want what your human task routing should be, you can call a business rule that's set up to do the routing rules. And you can create your routing rules based on what's happening at runtime right now. And so that's a very strong tie between business rules and human task. Okay, and then finally the last one is a mediator use case. This is more of a routing at runtime decision that you're making, and so there's a tight integration with the routing with mediator. Mediator is just basically a set of branching that's designed to make a choice before we even get to the business processes. So this is kind of a high-level view. As you can see, business rules are used everywhere in the product, can be used in many, many different ways, and provides a business-friendly way of looking at the world, but it's also very richly featured and tightly coupled with the rest of the product. So you can, here's a look at what the rule looks like itself. This is our design time in the composer. I can write rules in a very, very simple way. So here's an if-then rule. So I can say if this condition is true, then take this action. The drop-down is context sensitive. So if I have a condition, I'm setting up a condition, and it knows that my answer or my comparison needs to be a number, then it will only offer me data elements that are part of my dictionary, data elements, input elements, or other elements that are context specific to that condition. So it's very nice, very easy to use. You don't have to do any typing really. It just gives you a lot of hints about how to take the next step. Okay. So that's basically it for an overview of business rules, Oracle business rules. If you'd like to learn more or find out more about Oracle BPM, you know, business rules is part of BPM suite. It's also part of the SOA suite. But these are a bunch of the different places that you can go, and there's lots of good information. I think you might want to try the blog and see what's out there first, and then maybe join the Twitter feeds and Facebook as well. So thank you very much, and that's the overview for Oracle Business Rules.